welcome to Take of the Week, Square Take's official YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Here we're going to tell you about everything that's happening in Africa and indeed the world around. But not just that, we're also going to tell you how to feel about it, which I think is the most exciting part. So stay tuned. Good. Okay, settle down. Another Wednesday, another cloudy day. I mean, quite frankly, it's becoming the story of this. It's become the story of this season. I think this is kind of the longest stretch of cloudy days that we've had in a very long time. I remember there used to be rainy seasons where you had a lot of rain and then some sun, or maybe 2 days of rain and then a day of sunlight. But now it's just all rain. And if there's no rain, it's all clouds. And if there's no clouds, then it's all night, so you can tell what's actually going on in the sky. And technically, I'd be worried if this were the dry season, because if you're having so much sun and you're never really having any droplets of rain at all, then you start to feel that there's global warming on the horizon. But if there's so much rain, you don't know what to call it, so you just tuck yourself in bed. But then it's good. Thank you for finding time to make us part of your day. Try to make the most of what we have today. Good. So Ghana. Well, it looks like everything is going well. It's no trouble in paradise in that sense, because they actually announced yesterday, and I think that was on CNBC Africa, or through CNBC, as reported by CNBC Africa, that they were expecting to match last year's tally of the metric tons of gold that they mined. And what that essentially means is, by the way, last year was Ghana's best ever year when it came to mining gold. So they never mined as much gold last year, or as much gold ever as they did last year. It's like about 104 tons. And what they're saying now is that they're on track to match that or surpass that, which is a good thing. So it's essentially looking at a situation where you have one or two single or double digit growths, which is great. And I think that there's a lot to take from there. And it's a good thing because it's a testament to good leadership. And I think maybe it's good to kind of look back. For starters, Ghana is the leading producer of gold worldwide. So there's no country on earth that's been more blessed than Ghana than in terms of gold. And I think this guy called Trax NYC, I follow him on YouTube actually. And I think there was this episode of his where he actually came and then he actually showed what, mining in Ghana looks like. For all of the people who say gold is a girl's best friend, you should actually know where your best friend comes from. Yeah, so I suggest you go look at that. But yeah, so it's actually a testament to really what good leadership can do for you, because it wasn't this rosy in the sense where you have roughly, and I'm looking at the numbers here, we're looking at $11 billion in terms of lost revenue between 2013 and 2022. Not that the number means anything, yeah, but there was actually an incident once of someone who was caught at an airport, or the Accra airport, Kotoka, if I'm correct, and then he was caught with 48 kilograms of gold. This is what they call him with. So apparently he was busted as part of a sniffling operation. They were just trying to sniffle out what was going on there. And they estimated the amount of gold that they collected to be worth 48 million, or $18 million rather. So the point is, and it's not so much the fact that they caught him, it's what they did with him afterwards. And so they said, well, you can go. We'll just keep the gold and then you can go. That's the equivalent of seeing your child, snatch or steal a lollipop from the fridge, and then, because how much is a lollipop anyways? Tell the child, drop the lollipop back and go. You're not trying to beat the child, or you're trying to discipline the child. You're certainly not trying to some sort of instruct or re-instruct the child on the good manners to have in life. Ask me, ask daddy, but it's a lollipop. Nothing's gonna happen. That's what they did to this guy, by the way. They literally told, it's the equivalent of having your pizza guy deliver your pizza, but with one slice missing. And because it's one slice, and you probably assume that the delivery guy was hungry, you don't bother reporting to the delivery company or to the pizza company. It's like, oh yeah, he can help himself with that. We got what, 7, 8 slices left. That's how insignificant that was to the police, because that's $18 million, and they're like, yeah, man, it doesn't mean anything. And it shows you just how much, how many leakages, just how many gaps there were in the system. Ghana, in fact, was not collecting anything reasonable. Ghana was complaining time after time that for all of the gold they have and for all of what they're confident that they are mining, or artisans are mining, it's obviously a dichotomy between artisanal mining and just this large scale mining where you have these big shots, top guys come in, do their thing, bring in their machines, and then just swallow the gold. And not that you should swallow gold in real life, but that's what was happening. And they basically said this cannot happen anymore. And they did that under the leadership of John Mahama. And how I like to evaluate leadership is I look at the before and I look at the after. And before, in terms of numbers, Ghana was roughly edging out 70, and this was at max capacity. They were roughly edging out 70 metric tons of gold per year. In 1 year after instituting the gold board, so the gold board is some sort of a regulatory body. They basically tell you who gets to mine, or they approve who gets to mine. They buy the gold from the miners and then they export on behalf of the government. So it's like this institute that acts as a middleman, regulator, the whole 9 yards. Not something that I prefer, because why are you a seller and a regulator at the same time? But it does not matter because they're getting the job done. And there's been that jump since Mahama became president from 70, roughly, metric tons of gold mined total at max capacity. It's like, it's like you in December on the 1st, you're at 69 metric tons and you're like, guys, let's push and get 70. To in 1 year, without necessarily improving the ability of the miners to get more gold out of the ground, you bump it up by what, roughly 30%. So it's just 104 metric tons in just 1 year. And of course, now they're saying that they're on track to surpass that number. And so I think it's a good thing in the sense where it's obvious that when you have a good leader, the changes happen fast enough, soon enough. And I think that the change where Africa isn't seen anymore as just this breeding ground where you can come and harvest stuff. It's like coming to take this adage where I come from. Yeah, it's like you come and pluck the flower from the house. It's of course in this case referring to marrying a wife. So you just come, you take the lady out of her father's house, and then you pluck her, and then you take her home. So it's like it matters that you marry or you meet your wife when she's somewhat refined. So when she's gone to school, when she's got a job, she's got a career, when she's got purpose, it adds more value in that way. And so when you come into the house, and then let's say parents aren't, obviously that, let's say maybe low middle class and below, and the girl's barely finished secondary school, and she doesn't have a job, or she has a manual job, and she doesn't have an understanding of what a career would look like for her, it's a less attractive proposition, right? And so it's a fantastic thing that a lot of African countries now are thinking in the direction of, hey, before we export our raw materials, because what else is Africa known for except that? So before we export our raw materials, maybe it's a good idea to actually get those raw materials up to something that can fetch us more money. And if you know what I mean, it makes sense, because I don't know how it works. I haven't paid bride price before, but I'd like to assume that the bride price for someone who is a university graduate, let's say they actually have a master's, or they finished here in Nigeria, for example, and then they went outside, had a master's, I'd like to assume that what you'd pay as dowry for that person would be much more than, for example, someone who didn't complete secondary education. And it's the same logic here. So if you actually are able to get your raw materials up to a certain degree of use, then you can actually command more for them. And it's imperative that the countries, they start to think this way. And it's not that they've not thought like that before now. It's just that they've had really, really difficult times implementing them. And at this point, I'll come out to say, maybe I don't care how they're going about it. I mean, Mali, who is probably a younger brother to Ghana in terms of gold production, they had a fight with their principal mining operator. I think the name is Barrick Gold now, where actually what they did was that they wanted to renegotiate the contract with Barrick Gold. They said, look, we signed this contract years ago where we told you that you could just give us, probably 5% of what you make out of, of what you sell them for, and then you could keep the rest. But then guess what? In 2025, gold shot up from roughly 2,000 per ounce to 4,000, 5,000 per ounce. And so it made no sense to continue to espouse an arrangement that only served one side. Now, what did they do? They just went and they arrested guys from Barrick. So it's like your landlord saying to you, "Hey, guy, I've seen that nice ride you're parking outside of the house. I've seen your trips, the ones you're taking or you're posting online. The rent, you're a bit past this rent now. I think probably you should be paying a bit more rent. Yeah, and is it fair?" In the sense where an agreement is an agreement and you should be able to stick to the terms of the agreement? No. But my question is, who's the judge? I always ask, is it fair? No. Is it the right thing to do? It's debatable. Is it the morally upright thing to do? I don't know. I guess you'll have to ask God. But the question here is, if you are in the business of actually maximizing profit from your assets, then you have to get back to the conversation, or you have to get back to the negotiating table and say, hey, look, I know I said to you that you could export gold at so and so volume and then pay me only a fraction or this fraction of what you export or what you make from exporting it. But that's not enough anymore. It's like you're making so much more money than I am, and this doesn't feel like a good relationship, because good relationships, I think, are the ones where both parties feel like, they're gaining something, or both parties feel like they're walking away with a good deal, and that's not a good deal anymore. And so if you say that it is ethically correct that, a deal is a deal, an agreement is an agreement, we should probably stick to it, and you keep your 5%, and then, let's keep the ball rolling. If you probably say it that way, then what about the ethical part where one party is feeling cheated? And so who's answering that question now, right? And so that's why I stay away from answering those questions, and I ask real questions like, but how can you make more money, and how can both parties feel like they had a good deal at the end of the day? And for Mali, the only way they could go about that was I didn't approve. I mean, I'm not sure that I'm one of the authorized approvers of anything that Mali does, but I didn't think it was the best way they could have gone about it, but I didn't have a problem with it either way, right? And so they arrested the workers from Barrick Gold. They actually locked up the mine where Barrick Gold was working and said, hey, look, if you don't pay us more royalties, if you don't pay us more, you don't allow us to have much larger equity, then we're going to make the place hell for you. We're going to make this place unrunnable, or we're going to make this business unprofitable for you as much as possible. Now, Barrick Gold went, I don't know where they went to. They went to court crying, oh no, agreement is agreement. But guess what? So they actually settled, and nothing changed other than the fact that Mali got exactly what they wanted. And now they're back in business. Matter of fact, last I heard, they're actually looking at, sealing the contract and making it non-adjustable for the next 6 years or so, something along the lines of that. But I guess it's a case in point to make this singular case, or the singular point, or to prove the singular argument that if you're a country in Africa and you have raw minerals, and that's just about everybody maybe except, I don't know, the only name that comes to my mind now, the only name is probably Somalia or something. But even then, Somalia has the Gulf of Aden. They have the sea. They have the coastline, so that works for them. That works for them pretty nice. But if you're a country in Africa, and then you've got raw materials, try to make those raw materials or bring those raw materials up to a usable point that allows them to command a lot more money, a lot more value on the open market, and make more money for Pete's sakes. It's damn straight. It's not rocket science. It's like, if you like so much money, then put yourself in a position to make more money. I've never seen someone who maybe had the opportunity to upskill, and this is well within your range, had the opportunity to upskill and then had to take a job of $10,000 or paid them $10,000 monthly, for example, as opposed to one that paid them $2,000, and then they said, well, no, hell no, why the bother? It's like, why do you need to look to craft and wizard your ways into wealth when you can just get better at stuff? And so that's what I'm saying. Ghana's done, and they've done a very good job, a pretty good job at it. So props to President Mahama for that. Mali is doing, so props to their leadership for that. It's like, and I think of, I mean, you've got to have something to offer. The first thing I think about Ethiopia, yes, I know that they export coffee, but I have hung around a lot of white people. I've also, I've lived among, or I've only lived among black people my whole life. We don't consume coffee that much. It don't mean that much to us. And so, yes, in the sense where a lot of their money would come from the export of coffee, I agree. But look at the fine print. They're also exporting services. They're exporting, giving you the opportunity to travel through Ethiopian Airlines, and they're doing a fantastic job at that. I was watching a documentary the other day, and then the guy was just some sort of outlining, the day-to-day activity or the protocol that was involved, from waking up in the morning to making sure that the first flights depart. And I looked at that, and then I also looked at the separate documentary that I was outlining what the guys at Qatar Airways were doing, pre-flight, in-flight, post-flight. It's the same thing. It's literally the same thing. There's no difference. And so it's like if you want to fly on Ethiopian Airways, maybe a bit less expensive than Qatar Airways, but prepare to shell as many bucks as you would, or almost as many bucks as you would flying a much more perceived to be premium airline like Qatar or Etihad or Emirates or everything else in between. And that's because they've done the work. And so I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't think it's something that requires debate. Do the work, improve yourself, make more money for all of the stress that you had to expound or that you had to endure in the process of improving yourself, and be good for it. It's that simple. Now, another story that made the headlines this week was, obviously I'm in Nigeria, so I heard about it, was the school kids and their teachers who were released. I think that was last week, but it definitely made the news this week. And they were released unconditionally, we're told. It's good news for all intents and purposes. So straightforward, it's great news, because no child should have to deal with the headache of trying to get over the trauma that would have been inflicted to these kids in captivity. Even if they were not physically assaulted, and I doubt that was the case, it's obviously very difficult to recover from a period of time away from your parents if you're a child. It's like, I live away from my parents, most adults do. If I don't hear from my parents for 2 days or 3 days, there's a problem. And so not hearing from their parents, not seeing their parents, and being physically aware that they were in danger, because I'm guessing they weren't kept in the cozy place, is a trauma, or is a sliver of trauma that you should never really have to deal with at any point in time. It doesn't matter whether you're a child or you're an adult. And so it's really pathetic that they have to go through that, but it's also good that they're past that and that they've been released. And I think that some sort of offshoot of that is the corollary question: why is this happening? And I think that I have listened to quite a number of conspiracy theories. I mean, everybody's a security expert in Nigeria, I'll tell you that much now. And the argument is that there are people who are interested in the business of kidnapping. Now, that is true, because kidnapping is a business, first and foremost, right? You're selling people's freedom back to them. You're taking their freedom and you're selling it back to them. It's a bit like, no, I wouldn't say employment, right? Where you're taking people's time and you're selling it back to them for money. The money that the customer is paying you, you're paying, and obviously you're subleasing the people. But it's a bit like that in the scenario where there is a lot of factors that would contribute to such a denigration of the security situation anywhere. Yes, of course, like I said, kidnapping is a business. It's a lucrative business. People would do anything for their health. There's three things people don't play with, right? People don't play with their health, people don't play with their money, and people don't play with their freedom. And why I added money in there is because I've watched a number of stations or a number of channels on YouTube that talk about scams. It's like, okay, it's the classic Nigerian prince scam. So I have $10,000, but if you send me $500, then you can unlock the $10,000. People who don't have $500 are willing at that point to unlock that. And so people don't play about their money. People will actually go the extra. People will actually incur legal costs running into millions so that they can unlock $1 million that is owed to them. It's like, oh, we're going to threaten legal action. So that's a very common thing. So people don't play about that, right? But now, even worse is the fact that people, or the negative elements, are taking opportunity or seizing the opportunity to make a business out of it. Now, that's a bad thing for starters. But what is even worse is, I think, the cloud of incompetence that some sort of covers everything else that's happening. Because it's easy to say, yeah, we have insecurity. Yes, we're not able to protect the lives and the property of our citizens. But I'd like to look at it from the bigger picture. Look at it from a different, much larger, wider perspective. And it is that if you look around, Nigeria is kind of not alone in this. Actually, there's a lot of people, or a lot of countries in this instance, dealing with insecurity, terror at different levels. Mali, Niger, everybody in the Sahel actually. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, even Benin Republic. And I don't know why Benin Republic would have to deal with terror, but that's what it is. The northern part of Cameroon as well. Chad, Central African Republic. All these guys are dealing with, some level of insecurity or the other. Now, why you may be aware of what's happening in your respective countries is because you're in those countries, and then the local news stations are more likely to some sort of report on stuff happening in that country, but it's happening across board. It's not just in your country. And I think that the larger picture, or the larger question, is why is it happening? Because yes, it is true that you can have incompetent governments at all levels or across board in these countries. But it is also true that there's certain factors that make it more likely for terror or terrorism to thrive in places compared to the other, or one place compared to the other. And wait for it, hear me out. I think one heck of a primary one is the vegetation. Now, if you look at the Sahel, or if you look at anywhere that's south of the Sahara, but a bit north of, South Africa, it's really plain. There's not a lot of trees, definitely forest settlements, and those, what I found is that kind of terrain gives terrorists some sort of the perfect hideout. So it's really very easy to swoop in and swoop out. Swoop in, get a kid, get someone, and swoop out. Swoop in, commit some violence here and there, and then swoop out. And is it fair? No. Is it right? Absolutely not. But is it what is happening? Yes. And again, I'd like to say that you should desist from the theory that it has anything to do with where you find Muslims, because you don't hear about that happening in Dubai. You don't hear about that happening in Qatar. You don't hear about that happening in Jordan. You hear about that happening in Afghanistan, right? You can hear about that happening in Iraq, but that's also largely because you've not probably studied why it happens in those places. Now, if you look at a country that has a capital city, that capital city usually has all the government officials, all the government offices, all of the economic activities. Probably the second one that isn't so political but is more economic focused. And then those two are really where everybody wants to go. That's essentially the rural exodus. So people leave the countryside and then they move to the cities because there's more money to be made there. And on the flip side, you have to be able to backtrack and look at what's happening at the rural areas that those people are abandoning. So the rural areas that those people, citizens, are leaving behind. One, they don't have good roads, they don't have good water, they're not electrified. It's like the only social amenities that find their way to those places are just ballot boxes, nothing else. You never find a good road there. You never find a good hospital there. You never find a good school there. And what's happened is that these terror organizations, they've actually found a way to substitute for that. And nobody's telling you, but they are actually providing some sort of governance in those areas where the government is failing. It's like, look at every single place that is a terror stronghold. There's very little or negligible government presence there. Yes, the government will some sort of erect, what do you call it now? An army barrack and say, well, we are dispatching a battalion to that area. But that's reactive most of the time. That's after the fact. That's medicine after death. It's after the fact in response to what's happening. And so most of the time, these places are poorly governed. There is no development. And this applies. And I think one really good example was when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. I think this is 2023 or 2024. I believe it's 2024. I think you remember the image of the Air Force plane flying, and then there was people that were grappling onto the landing gear or holding onto the landing gear or holding onto the side of the plane because, well, they wanted to fly alongside the plane. I'm not exactly sure how they thought that would work, but if anything, it kind of tells you how desperate they were to leave the place. Now, when you actually study how the Taliban took over, they didn't just take over. And Kabul is where that happened. That's the capital of Afghanistan. And they didn't just take over Kabul. They actually systematically took over one countryside area, one rural area, one, settlement on the fringes of the country's borders after another. So it was plip, 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 a bit like dice falling on each other or falling on one on the other. And it was one settlement after the other until they completely surrounded Kabul. And of course, that forced the US to sort of pack up and go and then leave the Afghan citizens behind, of course, to be subject to the Taliban rule. But what I am saying in a nutshell is that the other places were already under the Taliban. And this is not because it's a Muslim area, right? You can claim that there is some link, but it's not the reason why. The primary reason for terror is because terror concentrates or terror flourishes in areas or places where the government has actually failed to bring development. It's the same thing happening in DRC. When you have fighters, and I can't remember the name now, from Rwanda or from the Liberation Front in Rwanda that are saying, well, we're going to take over, we're going to try to revenge or take some revenge on DRC for what happened during the genocide. And it's like, yeah, but they're not getting to Kinshasa. It's like Kinshasa feels very safe if you're there compared to the outskirts or to Lumumbashi or to Goma, for example, where these things happen more often. And that's because the government hasn't done any work there. There is a road or two, there is a neighborhood or two with any decent electrification going on there. There may be a hospital or two, there may be 3 schools or 4, but then that's it. And that's not enough. It doesn't call the shots. And it's not like when these people come in, they just kill everyone and then move on. Else, it will be called a hostile takeover. It's not that. It's a situation where they come in, because there's such a weak government presence in those areas, they just settle in and do what they want to do. They take over. They actually administer these people. I think somewhere in northeastern Nigeria, the guys who were responsible, I think northwestern Nigeria, so the guys who were responsible for the kidnap of these students in Oyo State 2 months ago, they actually administer regions in northwestern Nigeria. So they implement the Sharia law. They actually give Eid gifts. So Eid el-Fitr, I read, they give Eid gifts to some of the settlers, or the people who are in these places. And so to these people, that's all they know. That's the government they know. And so they can't be pressed to fight it. Right? And I think that's a terrible failure of government, because you should be able to live in the hinterland and then still feel that you're under a central government, still feel that you're a citizen entitled to amenities, to benefits, to the basics that should be accrued to you by virtue of being a citizen of said country. That's not happening. That's not happening in a lot of places, right, across West Africa, and that's why you have terror accounting for such a huge number of deaths. I believe 38,000 in Borno State alone since 2012. I know that's insane. Now, I don't have the figures for the other countries in the Sahel, but that looks insane to me, really. And I think that until we're investing in development, we're not going to get it right. So, word reaching us today is that the US has imposed and I don't know what to call it, a ban now, but they're saying essentially that the citizens of theirs who have been in DR Congo and that have contracted Ebola can no longer return to the US. So US is out of bounds for them until 21 days after they've left DR Congo and they've been quarantined and they've been shown to not have symptoms. Then they can come back in. And I know what it sounds like. And I know people will say, they're being too harsh. Where are those poor people going to be at? Where they're going to be alive? They're not going to die. And if they're going to die, at least they're not going to cause other people to die. And it makes sense. It makes all the sense to me. And I think that, quite frankly, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of how the US conducts business, but I certainly respect the way they approach it. And I think a lot of people can take, or everybody really can take borrow a leaf or two from their playbook. And I also think that if you had to deal with the things that they've had to deal with, if you had to be put in their shoes and experience what they've had to experience before coming up to this point, you definitely wouldn't have a different opinion on things. And it's kind of like black tax. All right? When you have someone who's hyper successful, who's made it, and who's a lot more comfortable now, and who has probably a bit to go around. Yeah, of course, there's the first round of, hey, can you help me? Can you come through for me? Can you fill this up? Can you fill my tank? I want to start a new business. Can you put me through that? Can you bankroll that? Yeah, I mean, the first round of requests is usually okay, but the problem is that they usually torpedo into the second, third, fourth, sixth, 8th, 10th, 25th rounds of requests, at which point, quite frankly, they're unsustainable. And I think if you look at it from that aspect or from that angle, it makes sense, because the US is like this guy that apparently, and I think the key word here is apparently, has it all figured out. And every other country, especially the ones who are developing, they tend to look up and say, well, bro, you figured it out. Your people are okay. They can afford 3 square meals. If they can't afford, you give it to them. Healthcare is great. And it's not great in the US, by the way, but it's an illusion of sorts. It's like, so you think that healthcare is great in the US. It isn't, but it looks like it. And so, yeah, healthcare is great. Kids are going to school. You can actually afford to spend money on cool stuff. You can afford to spend money on AI. You're building data centers worth billions of dollars. You're sending people to space. You're visiting the moon. And so you've got so much money, you can afford to do all this extra stuff. Surely you can have some to spare and give us some. Yeah, it makes sense that if they have that much to go around, they should be able to spare. But the question is, why do they always have to be the ones to spare? Why can't it go the other way? Why can't it go the opposite way? Why does it have to be? I mean, it's a parasitic relationship. I mean, we all know that. If there's just one person benefiting, there's a parasitic relationship. But why does nobody ever stop to ask, well, what's in it for them as well? Because I'm sorry to say this, you can say, well, we're exporting the brightest minds. No, you aren't the brightest. How you know you're the brightest is when you make a difference. There was an interview by this French guy, Mbappe, not a huge fan. I respect him, but I'm not a huge fan. But he said something that made sense. And he said the best teams are the ones that win. They're not the ones with the most potential. They're not the ones with the best players. They're not the ones with the most cohesion. They're not the ones with the best coaches. They're not the ones with the best staff. Winning is what makes you good. Period. And the truth is, at the core, African countries are not winning. And because African countries are not winning, they don't have anything tangible to say they're offering to other countries. And that's why when the US does take drastic decisions, like telling people that they're going to have to post a 15,000 bond for a visa, I think that is hilarious, by the way. If you know the average earning potential in Africa, $15,000 because you want to stay for 3 months is hilarious. But I understand. It's not completely devoid of sense. It's completely devoid of financial sense. Don't get me twisted, but not completely devoid of sense. In a sense where you should absolutely try to regulate who comes into your house. You should absolutely be careful and be wary of who you mingle with, who you allow into your space. And the same thing applies to immigration, to visiting. You should absolutely be careful. The reason why we in Africa, we don't really care about anybody coming into our space is because there's only one way up from here. If you're on the floor, if you're on the ground, you can only go up. And so it's very difficult for a stranger to come and make the place worse than it already is. And because you don't fear that it's going to get worse, you tell yourself, oh, well, any stranger that comes will probably make it better. And that's not true. That is seldom true. But that perception stands because, well, where do you go from if you're on the ground? And that's kind of the way we see things. But that's not the way you should see things. And the way we are not able to see, the reason why we're not able to see things is because objectively we have so little to offer to the US. And what we're learning now, by extension, is that it's not just you as an African citizen, where you're Nigerian, you're Liberian, you're from Sierra Leone, you're from Egypt, you're from Somalia, you're a referee from Somalia. It's not just you, even their own citizens are feeling the wrath. They understand that there's a method to the madness. And if you're going to constitute a risk to other people, then you're going to have to be neutralized. It's that simple. And so, yeah, that's what's happening. So the patients with Ebola who have been confirmed to have had Ebola are actually all in Europe now. Some of them in Germany. I think I heard there's one in France. I'll have to confirm that. And they're currently being quarantined. They're currently being quarantined. They're currently being treated, excuse me. The ones who have not been confirmed to have Ebola, they're being quarantined regardless. And why shouldn't they? It's like there is the principle of the lesser evil. Yes, it's uncomfortable for you to not be able to go home and see your loved ones and rest in your bedroom and then attend to your business. Oh my God. It's terrible that you're having to stay in a hospital room. I agree with you. And there's nothing worse. I mean, I heard once that I think it's an adage now, said that, you know, it's very, very reconforting and it's very uplifting to hear that you are special, unless it's a doctor that's telling you that. So you don't want to hear that you're special from a doctor because it means it's a different side of things. But that being said, those guys, they've been quarantined until it's been proven beyond reasonable doubt that they don't have the disease, and then they'll be allowed back into the US. And it makes all the sense in the world. Because why should the US allow, potential threats to come decimate their population? You're better off dealing with some citizen who has Ebola who is not in the country, and you're trying to save him, obviously with a long, what do you call it now, with a long stick, so you're making sure it's an 11-foot pole that you're touching him with. 10-foot pole is not safe enough. All right, and that's a better position to be in than to have to deal with the guy coming in and messing the whole place up, if it is the case that they're suffering from the disease and they're contagious. And so in a lot of ways, you have to, I don't necessarily like how they go about it, but I respect the principles behind it. Sovereignty first. That's how we should approach it. Only issue is we don't have what it takes to say we're sovereign. We're not even sovereign to start with. We're never sovereign. We have places like Malawi, 40% of the annual budget is financial aid. A lot of the times we keep going back to the IMF. We keep bending backwards forwards. There's a lot of bending involved. I think you get it. But we keep bending over and hoping and asking the IMF to bail us out. But I wonder sometimes with the IMF, it's like, at what point do you act like an actual creditor and say, yeah, I'm not going to give you any more money. You ain't paid the ones you borrowed before. You ain't paid back the ones you borrowed. At what point are we going to start? Are they going to start acting like real creditors and actually insist that, debt should be paid before new debt should be incurred? Now, I don't know what the agenda is with that. I'm not going to try to address that here and now, certainly, but that's kind of the issue. And because we're not sovereign in that instance, we cannot claim to want to protect our sovereignty, because you can only protect what you have, and we don't have that. And that's sad. But again, I think some good news on the line. Also, I hear that the trials are started, or they started this week for the vaccine candidates. I mean, obviously the bad news is a good news, bad news situations. Good news, they've started. Bad news, they're not going to be done anytime soon. But even worse news, it doesn't look like DR Congo is doing the best of jobs at containing it. I mean, it's what it is, in the sense where they were unprepared for an epidemic of that magnitude, and it's showing. And well, the best thing any country can do is say, okay, well, we're not going to allow our citizens to travel from you into the country. We're just going to try to not put ourselves in that position where we have to deal with people coming from you and then suffer any consequences. Now, do I predict that this will be protracted? Probably so. It'll probably last as long as it takes to get a vaccine up and running and effective. And so that's roughly 12 months from now at best, during which you can only imagine. I know last I checked, we had 600 plus deaths and about 12,000 plus cases. And the argument from the Africa CDC is that most of the cases have not been identified yet. And so it's a really bleak picture. It's really bleak. More can be done, better can be done. Not going to address the conversation about whether or not, the people that are actually fighting on the front lines and fighting the disease are being paid. They're not. And so it kind of falls back into the bracket of, well, was DR Congo ever prepared for it? No. Should they have been prepared? I mean, they actually have 2 strains named after them, right? So I think there's Zaire, and there's another one. It's not Bundigbuyo, which is the correct strain anyway. It's not that one. But there's Zaire, and then there's a third one, which I believe is named after them. And if you're going to have this many events, or if you're going to have this many incidences of an Ebola outbreak, you should probably have a hang on how to deal with it by now. But unfortunately, that's not the case. But there we go. So good on the US for insisting that they're going to protect their territory. Also good on Nigeria. I mean, being out and then come back, and then we're subjected to some sort of screening. It was just a form you fill, but basically it's supposed to help them contact trace a lot better. So that's good. It's good that that's happening, and hopefully you can get rid of the outbreak, or we can get over the outbreak as soon as possible. I don't know that it is as quick as a wink of my eye. I mean, it's been a while since I winked at anyone, so maybe it's comparable in duration, but yeah, it'll take some time. It'll probably take some time.